welcome back to the channel, and this is Apple's M4 MacBook Pro. Not M4 Pro, not M4 Max, but the M4 with the new nano texture display. Now, I've actually had this for about a month, so let's talk about it. Now, just like any other reviews on this channel, let's quickly talk about the spec of this MacBook Pro. So the one I'm reviewing is using the new M4 chip with a 10-core CPU and GPU, 32 gigs of unified memory, and 2 terabytes of SSD, which is basically the top tier spec that you can purchase for about $2,750 or about $2,575 if you're a student using the educational portal. But the base model of this MacBook Pro starts at 16 gigs of RAM with 512 gigs of SSD, and you can get that for $1599 or $1499 with education discount, which I think is a really great price for such a powerful laptop, but we'll talk more about its performance in just a little bit. So when you first set up the M4 MacBook Pro here, you're greeted with Apple's newest OS, macOS 15.1 Sequoia. And one of my favorite features here for macOS 15.1 is iPhone mirroring. So if you've updated your iPhone to iOS 18.1 software, you can now mirror whatever's on your iPhone right on your Mac. Now, what this means is that you can access your phone remotely. You can send messages, check Instagram, check your Facebook account, control your smart home, and even play games. Now, I think the best part here is that you can even drag and drop files from the iPhone to the Mac and vice versa, which I think is a game changer. And then obviously you have all the Apple Intelligence stuff system-wide, like writing tools, enhanced Siri, and summarize notifications. But yeah, if you use an iPhone and you just picked up this M4 MacBook Pro, definitely check out iPhone mirroring. It's a game changer for sure. All right, now before we talk about the performance of the new M4 chip, I just wanted to quickly talk about this new display. Now, it's still the same mini LED that we all know and love, so it gets really bright and has really accurate colors that looks beautiful at all angles. But there are actually some upgrades here for M4. First is the smoother display, thanks to a new quantum dot technology that Apple's using for these M4 MacBook Pros. This is something Apple didn't really announce or have in their spec sheet, but someone on Twitter did confirm that this is using some sort of new quantum dot film to make the overall display smoother and more accurate than ever. Now, the response time didn't really change all that much, but it's definitely better than what we had. Secondly, the base SDR nits have been boosted to 1000 nits, but only if the ambient sensor senses a bright light source. And if it does sense that, it's really bright, then it'll automatically boost the display's brightness to 1000 nits. And then the last thing that Apple introduced with the M4 MacBook Pros is the inclusion of the nano texture display, which is an additional $150 upgrade. Now, I think there's a misconception here with nano texture, with people saying, oh, it's just a matte display, it's nothing new, we've seen this before. Until you actually see this thing in person, I think you'll change your mind on how good this actually looks and how different this looks compared to a traditional matte display on a laptop. Now, the reality is that nano texture isn't just a matte layer on top of the display. The actual glass is etched at the nanometer level, which gives it that matte look and help reduces glare. But one thing that I did notice here with the nano texture display is that colors and clarity still looks as good as the MacBook Pro with a glossy display, but also the blacks are still deep and contrasty, which isn't something that I can say with a traditional matte display where black somewhat turns into a dark gray color. I think if you're the type of person who often works by the window or you're always out and about and you're annoyed with glare, you gotta pick this option up. Now, as someone who loves to color grade, I had no issues in Final Cut Pro color grading log footage, and I think the colors look great on this display. Oh, and one last thing to mention here is that if you do get the nano texture display, you'll also get the Apple polishing cloth out of the box, which is really nice. Now, the design of the MacBook Pro hasn't really changed much since this 14-inch MacBook Pro came out in 2021, but two things to note here in terms of design. One, there's an upgraded FaceTime camera. The FaceTime camera here has now been upgraded to a 12 megapixel center stage camera, which means the quality is going to be a lot better, and it'll now track you to make sure that you're actually in the center of the frame. But if you don't want center stage turned on, you can just turn it off, and you'll have this like super ultra wide field of view, which is awesome. The other thing to note here is that the space gray color is now gone. For M4, M4 Pro, and M4 Max, it's only space black and silver for the color choices, which I think is great because I wasn't really that big of a fan of space gray, and space black ultimately is a better color here. All right, now in terms of performance, I've actually been using this as my main editing machine for the past month and a half, And spoiler alert, I'm really impressed. I've been using a maxed out M3 Max for about a year now, and going from this to now the M4 MacBook Pro, honestly, it didn't feel all that different, minus the nano texture display. I think performance-wise, it's about the same as the M3 Max on a day-to-day basis, but obviously, when you get into more heavy intensive tasks, that's when, you know, the M4 Pro and M4 Max chips will still have the upper hand. Now, from what I've experienced recently, whenever I'm using the new magnetic masking feature in Final Cut Pro 11, this machine is noticeably slower at rendering my footage compared to the M3 Max that I was using. It's not that, you know, it's not usable, it's just rendering my timeline a little bit slower. Now, playback performance is also a little bit worse, having to set the playback to performance, especially if I have too many layers on my timeline and plugins and my video isn't rendered out yet. But the thing is, if you're not really color grading all that often and you don't have a lot of plugins on your timeline, you're probably not going to notice this being slow. It's actually really fast for what you're getting, and I'm just really spoiled because, you know, I had this M3 Max for the longest time, and, you know, I didn't have to worry about any of those issues. But yeah, again, this machine is also $3,000 to $4,000 cheaper than the M3 Max that I was using. And even if I was using the base M4 model with 16 gigs of memory and 512 gigs of SSD, I really do think that you'll find the performance on this laptop perform way better than 80% of the laptops in the market right now. And it's doing all of that while being unplugged, which is just insane. And speaking of being unplugged, what about battery life? Well, battery life is just as good as its performance in my opinion. This M4 chip is supposed to last up to 24 hours on a single charge, and while I don't think it's possible for me, the longest I've actually been able to use this laptop straight though is 11 hours, and I've had multiple international flights since getting this laptop, and it lasted the entire flight. Now, if I'm not traveling and it's more of a light week, light month for me, I'd say roughly about 20 hours of battery life without any heavy video editing, mostly just web browsing, writing emails or scripts, watching some videos, and maybe, you know, going on Photoshop or Lightroom here and there. So if you're after battery life and you don't want to get a bigger laptop, this 14-inch M4 MacBook Pro is honestly one of the best laptops right now. And yeah, that's the M4 MacBook Pro in a nutshell. It's not cheap by any means, but it's definitely worth the premium price tag in my opinion. If you already have, you know, an M1 Pro, an M1 Max MacBook Pro, it's definitely not worth the upgrade. But if you have an M1 MacBook or an Intel MacBook, then definitely upgrade to this one because it's worth it. I'm just really glad that for $15.99, we finally have a base MacBook Pro that comes with 16 gigs of unified memory versus the 8 gigs that we had in previous years. We have 3 Thunderbolt 4 ports, HDMI 2.1, an SD card reader, a gorgeous 14-inch display that you can also spec with a nano texture display. For a base model MacBook Pro, it checks all the boxes. Now, if you're not in the Apple Silicon system yet, could you maybe save some money and just buy a refurb M1 Max MacBook Pro? Yeah, obviously, that's if you want to go the used route. I think M1 Max or even M1 Pro are still very, very good laptops that's going for around $900 to $1,600 used. The only thing is, the laptop's condition might not be in the best shape, the battery health probably won't be at 100%, and you can't opt in for warranty like Apple Care in case, you know, anything ever happens to it. So if you're gonna spend $1,500 on a laptop, I would almost always recommend getting something new, get a warranty on it, it'll last you several years, and yeah, you won't regret picking this one up.